Hi, I'm Mistress. The day I said I do, my mother slapped me, so hard my veil ripped. You married a crippled lunatic, she hissed. Don't crawl back when he drags you into poverty. She shoved me out the door, dress in my arms, family laughing behind her. No one asked who my husband really was, and when the truth surfaced at our wedding, their laughter died in their throats, leaving a silence that became my first gift. Before we dive in, what time are you listening, and where from? Drop a comment below. Your stories matter here. I used to believe a house could remember laughter, that the walls might hold a hymn longer than they hold a grudge. Walking back into Mama's foyer that afternoon proved me wrong. The polished floor still smelled of lemon oil, but the air tasted like judgment. My fiancé, Elijah, stepped in beside me, cane tapping once before he settled his weight. His old football injury made him favor the left side, yet he never asked for help. I admired that. Mama despised it. Geneva Montgomery drifted down the staircase in her Sunday best suit as though she'd been waiting on a cue. A porcelain smile appeared, thin as rice paper. "Welcome home, baby," she sang, then eyed Elijah's brace. The smile cracked. A colder face peeked through. I introduced them, voice steady. Elijah offered his hand. Mama avoided it. "You must be tired," she said, but the words landed like frost. She led us to the sitting room, portraits of ancestors staring from heavy gold frames. My older sister Tamara lounged on the sofa, manicured fingers scrolling her phone. She barely glanced up. Mama inhaled. "Let's not pretend," she said, dropping the syrupy tone. "You walk in here with a man who can barely stand, expecting applause? This family has a reputation." Elijah opened his mouth, but I squeezed his arm. "Our life isn't a headline," I told her. Mama scoffed. "It will be, when he drags you into bankruptcy." Then, louder so the kitchen staff could hear, "I raised you to marry strength, not cling to weakness." The next seconds blurred. Tamara muttered, "You brought this on yourself." Mama's ring caught the chandelier light as her hand lifted. The slap cracked against my cheek, sharp, metallic. I tasted copper. My veil, tucked under my arm for alteration, slipped free. Mama yanked it, fabric ripping like paper. "You're not wearing white in my church," she hissed. Silence fell. Even the grandfather clock seemed to pause. Elijah steadied me. His calmness only fueled Mama's fury. "Get out," she ordered, "and don't come crawling back when the pity money runs dry." No one stopped her. Not Tamara, not my two silent brothers, not even Daddy, who lingered in the hallway pretending to study the carpet pattern. I gathered my purse. Elijah lifted our overnight bag. The front door slammed behind us with a finality I felt in my ribs. Outside, the July heat wrapped around us. Elijah guided me to his dented sedan, the seatbelt clicking like the closing of a vault. We pulled away from the house that had been mine since birth. I watched the porch shrink in the mirror, cheek still stinging. 2 miles up the road, he whispered, "Are you all right?" "I will be." I breathed through the ache. "This isn't the end. You know that, right?" he echoed. I nodded, grateful for his certainty. The asphalt rolled beneath us, and my mind drifted to the first time we met. Downtown library, one rainy Thursday. A boy cried over a torn picture book. Elijah knelt, brace creaking, and fixed the page with transparent tape he carried just in case. I remember thinking his kindness filled the room more than any able-bodied swagger ever could. I never told Mama that part. I never told her Elijah owned patents from custom reading devices he donated to schools. He preferred quiet purpose to loud praise. That suited me. Raindrops began peppering the windshield. Summer storms brew fast in Carolina. Wipers squeaked, a tired rhythm keeping time with my pulse. Elijah reached across the console, threading his fingers through mine. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would wait for privacy. The resolve took their place for now. We stopped at a gas station to grab coffee. While he paid, I opened the trunk to make room for groceries. My veil lay among the luggage, crumpled, a jagged tear running through the lace. I smoothed it across my lap, fingertips tracing the ripped edge. The symbol hurt worse than the slap. Still, something inside me refused to toss it. I folded the veil gently, wrapped it in a spare t-shirt, and slid it into my suitcase. Elijah returned with 2 steaming cups. "We'll fix it," he said, noticing the lace in my hands. His tone was promise, not pity. I closed the trunk. The sky boomed overhead. Thunder rolled like distant drums. Driving toward the motel, I felt the first ember of determination spark beneath the bruise on my cheek. My mother thought exile would break me. She forgot the house doesn't hold the hymn, the singer does. But what my mother didn't know was what Elijah had never told anyone. Not even me. It started with a letter, one I found wedged between pages of an old Bible. I whisper those words to steady myself because everything since Mama's slap feels like a free fall. A night wind rattles the motel's single-pane window. The neon vacancy sign outside hums like a tired cricket. Elijah sits at the little laminate desk, his shoulders curved over a cracked leather Bible that once belonged to his grandfather. Reading it is how he resets his compass when life tilts. I'm folding the thin motel blanket, pretending order matters, when a brittle envelope slips from between the psalms and flutters to the carpet. Elijah freezes. The paper is yellowed, edges soft as cotton. On the front, in fountain pen ink, Elijah T. for when they turn their backs. He lifts it with both hands, as if the thing might crumble. "I never noticed this pocket," he murmurs, voice low enough to keep motel secrets safe. He breaks the seal. A second later, his eyes widen, not with fear, but something close to recognition mixed with disbelief. "Elijah?" I move closer, the blanket forgotten. He reads in silence, lips moving, until finally he sets the letter beside the Gideon pamphlet that came with the room. "My grandfather. He left me more than stories." He taps the paper. "A trust. Hidden under a company no one links to me. Patents, medical devices, they matured years ago. It's worth—" His voice fails for a beat. "Billions, Mistress, with a B." My first thought is absurd. Mama would choke on that number. The second thought is sharper. Why didn't he ever claim it? Out loud, I ask, maybe too softly, why keep this buried? He leans back, leg brace squeaking. Because the world salutes money, not mercy. I wanted to stand on my own legs, figuratively anyway. I figured if people loved me broke, then love was real. But your mother declared war tonight and peace feels naive. I sink onto the edge of the bed, mind sprinting. Billionaire fiancé, torn veil, motel lamp buzzing overhead like a bad joke. Part of me tastes betrayal. Another part admires his quiet strength more fiercely. "You were afraid I'd see a dollar sign instead of you," I say. He nods, apology in his eyes. I exhale through pursed lips, letting the anger pass before it sticks. Money never fixed a broken family photo. It won't start now, but it can buy freedom. A memory flashes, Mama's voice bragging at church picnics about marrying up. The irony bites so hard I almost laugh. She spat the word burden at the man who could underwrite her entire social circle. I picture her face if she knew. Elijah reaches for my hand. "We could vanish tonight," he offers. "Take a flight west. Build a life where Montgomery gossip can't follow." The idea tastes sweet for a second, until I picture Mama's satisfied smile, the one she wears after winning a petty argument. "Disappearing would feel like surrender," I answer. The motel clock shows 2:14 a.m. I tell him I need to think. He stretches out on the scratchy bedspread, exhaustion claiming him almost immediately. I sit by the curtained window, veil in my lap. Streetlight strips flicker across the torn lace. I trace the rip again and again, each pass resurfacing a memory. Tamara's whisper, the sting of Mama's ring, my brother's silence. The ache flares, then settles into something solid. Not vengeance exactly, more like resolve hardened in a kiln. Dawn edges in, peach and gray. The world beyond the parking lot glimmers after overnight rain. I rise, fetch the iron Elijah used on his dress shirt, and press the veil on the tiny motel board. The fabric releases its creases but keeps the scar. Perfect. Elijah stirs. I fold the veil, tuck it in its tissue, and say to the room, "They meant this tear to shame me. I'll carry it like embroidery." He sits up, confusion fading into a soft smile as he sees the determination I didn't have 12 hours ago. "We're still getting married," I declare. "On our date, in our way. And when my mother arrives to gloat, she'll learn your full name, along with everything she threw away." Elijah rubs sleep from his eyes, the corners crinkling. Then there's something I should give you, he says, handing me the letter again. Knowledge is leverage. I tuck the envelope beside the veil. For the first time since the slap, my heartbeat feels steady. The path ahead will be messy, maybe ugly, but it will be ours. And so I made the first phone call. Not to my mother. To the venue manager she bullied into canceling everything. Larnell picked up on the second ring, breathless like he'd sprinted to the phone. Mitrice Montgomery? Look, before you say anything, I'm sorry. I never wanted to cancel. I let him apologize 3 sentences longer than necessary, listening to guilt untangle itself. When he finally paused, I said, Keep the garden. I'm still getting married. Same date. Silence, then a relieved laugh. I knew she was bluffing. Your mama threatened to sue, said you were unfit. I stalled, kept the file on my desk in case you called. I'm calling now. He promised the original contract would be reinstated by morning. I thanked him, hung up, and felt my spine lengthen. 1 blockade lifted, dozens left to move. The motel clock nudged past 8. Elijah had stepped out for coffee and returned with 2 paper cups and a grin. I shared the news. He toasted the air. To borrowed gardens turning into ours. We spent the next 3 hours building a plan no one from my family would see coming. Elijah's inheritance stayed buried behind his grandfather's company name. Every check would be written from that shell. He pulled out a tablet, scrolling vendor lists. I vetoed anyone Geneva ever complimented. Instead, we hired folks she'd humiliated. The seamstress whose daughter Geneva once called trashy for wearing a homemade dress. The florist Mama demeaned for arranging lilies instead of roses. And the jazz quartet she claimed sounded like bar music. Each said yes within minutes, some refusing deposits. By dusk, contracts signed, Elijah drove us to a thrift store on the edge of town. I found a vintage tea-length dress. Silk, simple. The seamstress, Mrs. Coulter, measured me beside a rack of prom gowns, tapping pins into the torn veil. Your mother shredded this? She asked, eyes narrow. I nodded. She smiled, wicked and warm. Then we'll stitch the rip in silver thread so it shines. Back at the motel, my phone lit up with Geneva's latest post, a staged selfie of her clasping rosary beads captioned, Pray for my child, lost to manipulation. Comments flooded in, cousins I hadn't seen in years betting how fast Elijah would clean out my purse. Tamara chimed in with a laughing emoji and a link to a GoFundMe for Mitrice's inevitable legal fees. I screenshotted everything, sliding each insult into a folder marked Evidence. No response. Silence sharpens faster than words. 2 days later, a padded envelope arrived at the motel desk. Inside, a glittery card reading, Congrats, I guess, from Tamara. A folded job application to their gas station slipped out, from cashier to janitor, every box pre-checked. I laughed once, filed it under evidence as well, and moved on. That night, rain rattled the roof. Elijah knelt, slowly, carefully on the stained carpet, holding his grandfather's gold band. His eyes shimmered in the lamp glow. I own companies, he said, but nothing in those balance sheets made me feel the way I do when you say my name. The ring was warm against my skin. I answered, yes, with one rule. We marry on our terms, and they watch. He agreed. We chose the exact Saturday Geneva had erased from her calendar. Larnell upgraded the booking to the larger garden terrace at no charge. Word spread quietly among our new vendors. They moved like a covert choir, rehearsing revenge notes. Invitations? Only 5, handwritten. Mrs. Coulter, Mrs. Hawkins, the florist, Coach Miller, whom Geneva once underpaid, Mr. Ruiz, our childhood neighbor whose lawn flowers Mama had ruined with weed killer to prove a point, and Ms. Leona Grant, the librarian who introduced me to Elijah that rainy Thursday. As for the rest of the seats, they'd fill themselves. Geneva was already whispering about a society brunch scheduled at the same venue. I knew she planned to storm in and claim the spotlight. Let her think the day belonged to someone else. Surprise tastes better when served cold. One detail remained: music. Elijah contacted a gospel choir from his grandfather's nonprofit in Atlanta. They agreed to appear unannounced, singing Amazing Grace the moment I reached the aisle. If Geneva tried to shout, 50 voices would drown her wrath. A week before the wedding, Larnell emailed a single line, "Stage is set. Storm's welcome." I closed my laptop, pressed the veil, now stitched with silver lightning down its scar, against my palm. In the mirror, the thread glimmered like quiet defiance. She thought she destroyed everything. But Geneva had no idea the real wedding was about to take place, in the venue she once banned me from. My promise to Larnell echoed in my head as dawn slid pink over Charlottesville. The garden slept under a veil of mist, benches beaded with dew like beads of patience. I walked the flagstone path alone before anyone else arrived, letting my heels click a steady tempo against nerves. Every step carried a memory. Mama's ring against my skin, Tamara's smirk, the motel lamp flickering over new plans. Yet my spine stayed tall. Mrs. Coulter's dress skimmed my calves, simple silk cinched at the waist. No corset, no crystals, just resolve stitched into every seam. At the altar, Elijah waited, braced, leg planted square, suit jacket hugging broad shoulders that once carried high school trophies and now held something larger. Quiet awe. He scanned me from shoes to veil, silver light scar in full view, and his eyes answered all the questions I hadn't breathed aloud. Across the grass, Mrs. Hawkins nestled lavender among white chairs. She leaned in as I passed. "They'll remember today," she whispered, voice like hymn notes. I squeezed her hand. Guests trickled in, only 5, but each a chapter Mama tried to rip out of my history. Ms. Grant, the librarian who shielded me from bullies, signed the guest book with calligraphy flourishes. Coach Miller limped to the front row, knee still ruined from budget cuts Mama voted for at the booster meeting. Mr. Ruiz set a single sunflower on an empty seat honoring his late wife, the woman Mama labeled garden ignorant. Each face glowed with a quiet vindication that warmed the cool air. At 10 sharp, a guitarist plucked the opening bars of Grandma's favorite hymn. I turned the aisle into my own mile of reclamation, veil brushing my shoulders, lavender scent following. Halfway down, a thought rose clear. I am not here for their blessing. I am here because love is work, and work is holy. Elijah's smile steadied the final steps. The officiant, retired Judge Wallace, opened his leather folder. "We gather," he began, voice weathered like courthouse marble. Then the gate hinges shrieked. Geneva stormed in wearing funeral black, 2 cousins flanking her like ill-trained bodyguards. My grandmother clutched pearls behind her. "What is this charade?" Mama's accusation cracked through the garden. Guests gasped. Birds scattered from the oak branches. Elijah pivoted slowly, cane grounded. "It's our wedding," he said, tone steady as case law. "Seats are there, gates are there, pick one." Mama's gaze cut to the torn veil, then to the modest crowd. "You hid here to shame me." I stepped off the altar, bouquet tight in my grip. "No shame, Mama. Just truth." From the flowers, I withdrew a folded document ribbon-tied in navy. The seal of Virginia shimmered. I held it so sunlight hit the embossed stamp. "Notarized statement of financial stewardship," I announced. Elijah Turner, anonymous benefactor to 42 nonprofits, heir to Thompson Medical Patents. I paused, letting numbers she worships take shape in her mind. Our household will not be begging. Color drained from her cheeks. She opened her mouth, maybe to deny, maybe to grasp, but Judge Wallace cleared his throat. "Ma'am, as an officer of the court, I caution against defamation today. I do still hold my license." A ripple moved through the benches. First a hush, then a lone clap from Ms. Grant, joined by Mr. Ruiz, then everyone. Mama's cousins stepped back. Even Grandma's shoulders sagged as though a weight she'd never admitted finally slid off. I met Mama's eyes, icy, bewildered, smaller than I'd ever seen. Without raising my voice, I told her, "You taught me reputation can buy anything, but it can't buy my silence anymore." She didn't walk out. She fled. And that's when my father stood up and finally spoke. My mother's footsteps faded through the garden gate, leaving a hush so complete I could hear my own pulse. Guests held their breath, unsure where to look after that public gut punch. Then a chair creaked. Daddy, Ellis Montgomery, rose from the second row, thinning hair catching late morning sun. He hadn't spoken more than 5 words to me in 2 years. Now his eyes fixed on mine, wet and unblinking. "You were right," he said. Gravel edged each syllable as though the sentence scraped its way out. He buttoned his blazer with shaky fingers and moved down the aisle, passing the librarian, the florist, the neighbor's mama despised. He stopped a few feet away, hands hanging like they'd forgotten purpose. "You were right," he repeated, softer. Judge Wallace closed his binder, signaling the ceremony could wait. The choir shifted, murmuring prayers. Daddy drew a breath that seemed to cost him. "I should have stood between you and her," he confessed, voice carrying without effort now. "Instead, I stood behind her. Easier that way." He glanced toward the empty gate where Mama had fled. "Geneva told me Elijah would drain us, said you'd end up begging on the courthouse steps. I believed her because doubt is lighter than courage." He looked at Elijah, then back to me. "And I let silence do the harm." Words I'd ached to hear felt heavier than I imagined. My throat tightened, but no tears came. I'd spent them months ago behind motel curtains. Daddy reached into his inside pocket, pulling out a worn envelope, edges browned like old parchment. "Meant for you. Never mailed." He placed it in my palm. My fingers tingled, recognizing his looping handwriting through the yellow paper. I slid a nail under the flap and unfolded 3 pages smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. The letter dated 2 springtimes back, the night Mama first banned Elijah from Sunday supper. Lines wavered where ink met tears. "I failed you, Tracy. I keep telling folks I'm stuck between wife and daughter, but truth is I'm hiding behind wife because I'm afraid of the daughter becoming braver than her daddy ever was." The parchment blurred. I blinked hard, refusing a breakdown in front of half the county, but understanding settled where forgiveness was still absent. I folded the pages, pressed them over my heart, and nodded. Evening found us beneath the massive oak at the back of the property, reception candles flickering in glass jars while guests traded quiet stories nearby. Elijah gave us space, chatting with Coach Miller about joint pain remedies. Crickets began their shift. Daddy and I sat on a wooden swing that hadn't moved since my middle school dance pictures. He started talking. Soft facts of my birth, how he'd paced hospital halls muttering baseball stats to stay calm, stories of teaching me to ride a bike while Mama criticized grass stains on my jeans. Mid-memory, he choked up, covering his mouth. I placed a hand on his forearm. No dramatic embrace, just shared breath in summer air. "I'm not ready to forgive," I admitted when the silence stretched. "But I'm ready to stop carrying stone." He exhaled, shoulders easing. "Tell me what showing up looks like." "Lunch on Thursdays, picking up when I call, and when Mama starts rewriting history, you speak." He nodded, tears crusting at his lashes. I walked him to his truck parked along the gravel lane. Before climbing in, he turned and gave a small wave. Not the absent-minded gesture he used at barbecues. This one trembled with intention. For the first time I waved back. Guests departed under strings of Edison bulbs. The choir loaded sheet music. Mrs. Coulter hugged me, whispering how silver thread can outlast silk. Elijah slid an arm around my waist as we watched Daddy's taillights disappear. "One storm down," he said. I tucked the unsent letter into my clutch beside the notarized statement, 2 weapons forged from truth. My chest felt lighter, yet a distant rumble reminded me Carolina summers breed more than one thunderhead. But while one door opened, another slammed shut. Geneva wasn't done, not even close. Daddy's taillights were still a red smear on the gravel when someone pounded on our cottage door just after sunrise. Elijah and I had stayed overnight in the small guest house Larnell loaned us behind the venue. No honeymoon, just exhaustion and takeout boxes. The knock rattled the windows. I cracked the door. A man in a charcoal suit, briefcase tucked tight, didn't bother with a greeting. "Mitrice Montgomery?" he asked, scanning a clipboard. I nodded. He handed over a thick envelope, then pivoted back to his black sedan without a word. Inside, Elijah poured coffee while I sliced the seal. Thick legal paper slid free. "Cease and desist, immediate." In bold, unauthorized exploitation of the Montgomery family name. Defamation resulting in reputational harm. Geneva's lawyer used every syllable he learned in law school. Elijah read beside me, knuckles whitening around the mug. "She's not licking her wounds. She's reloading." A paragraph deep in the document froze us both. Any violation would trigger review of beneficiary status in the Montgomery Family Trust. Translation: strip me of every cent Daddy once promised for college funds and emergency safety nets. A sticky note flagged the clause, Geneva's handwriting looped in pink ink. Actions have consequences. Anger rose, but so did something cooler. Analysis. I motioned Elijah to the kitchen table. Let's see how deep her claws go. He breathed through his frustration, fetched my dusty laptop and booted it while I texted Daddy. Need to talk soon. Mom's lawyer. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No response. We scanned filings Geneva's firm had lodged against former employees, neighbors who'd challenged property lines, even a pastor who once corrected her publicly. Strategic lawsuits, slaps, meant to scare folks into silence. Pattern established, I muttered, bookmarking each case. Elijah called an investigator friend from Atlanta, explaining in measured tones the need for background on Geneva's counsel. By mid-afternoon, we drove downtown to the trustee's office, glass, chrome, and expensive carpet that hushed every footstep. I requested access to the Montgomery Trust ledger, citing beneficiary rights. The young clerk's eyes flickered with recognition. "You're not the first to question Mrs. Montgomery," she whispered while printing a transaction summary. Columns of numbers revealed money shuffled between sub-accounts 2 days before our ceremony. One note beside a transfer read pending removal of secondary heir. Then I saw it. An overlooked sentence in the 1989 trust charter. If a listed child is legally married and living, removal requires unanimous sibling consent. Geneva had 2 sons, 1 daughter, Tamara, and none had signed. Power pulsed back into my limbs. I snapped a phone photo of the clause, thanked the clerk, and walked out taller. Evening settled violet over the hills when Elijah and I returned to the cottage. I laid the trustee statement on the table like a winning hand. "She forgot her own fine print," I said. Elijah's grin was proud and weary. "I married a hurricane," he answered, echoing last night's vow. We drafted a response, a polite refusal to cease anything, citing the charter clause, attaching evidence of her public posts. I added screenshots of Tamara's job application prank and Mama's pity selfie. Facts, not fire. Before sending, I contacted Women's Legal Shield, an organization that aids daughters isolated by family power plays. Their attorney, Ms. Dawson, returned my call within an hour. "We've danced with Geneva before," she said. "We'll waltz again." Around midnight, rain started. Steady. Confident. I stood at the doorframe breathing petrichor, veil draped over my arm. Elijah joined me, resting his cane against the wall. "Think she'll back off?" he asked. Lightning flashed. "Not her style," I replied, smoothing the silver seam on the lace. "But I'm done dodging." We emailed the legally grounded rebuttal at 12:07 a.m., copied to the trustee board and Ms. Dawson. Then I shut the laptop with finality and slid the veil back into its tissue. Geneva wanted me to sprint. Instead, I planted. But before the paperwork was ready, something else arrived, an invitation that wasn't really an invitation at all. It came late afternoon, just as I was packing away the last of the documents I'd gathered with the legal aid team. A courier knocked, offered a tight nod, and handed me a slim black envelope, the kind you'd expect for a gala or a funeral. My name was written in silver ink, only Mistress. No Mrs., no mention of Elijah. Just my name, just me. I turned it over in my hands, sensing something deeper than the expensive cardstock and fancy cursive. Inside, the message was minimal. Dinner, Geneva's estate, just family, 1 night only. No time listed, but I knew exactly when she meant. Friday evening, just like old times. Elijah, standing beside me, read it over my shoulder. His brow furrowed. "She's baiting you." I nodded. "Of course she is." "Then we don't go." "I do," I said quietly. "Alone." He looked at me like I'd just suggested jumping into a tank with sharks. "Why?" "Because Geneva never invites without an angle, and if she's staging something, I need to see what the play is." He didn't like it, but he knew better than to argue. Instead, he kissed my hand and said, "Go in like a lamb, but leave like a lion." Friday came with a cold drizzle and a colder sky. Geneva's estate sat like a museum at the edge of the hills, polished, perfect, but lifeless. I pulled up alone and walked up the marble steps. The front doors opened before I touched the bell. A butler I didn't recognize nodded stiffly and ushered me in. The room was as I remembered: wide chandeliers, antique wood floors, tall portraits that stared without warmth. Geneva always wanted the place to look like a legacy, just in case her actions failed to build one. As I stepped into the dining room, I felt every head turn toward me. Geneva was already seated at the head of the long table, wineglass in hand, lips curled. "Well," she said, not bothering to stand. "You finally crawled back. Hungry?" I gave her a polite smile and walked to the table. The room was quieter than I remembered. My brothers sat stiffly on either side of her. Ellis kept his gaze on his plate, as if the linen napkin held secrets more interesting than this ambush. There was one empty seat, at the end of the table beside the framed photo of our father. I took it without a word. You say dinner began without ceremony. The clinking of silverware filled the silence. Then Geneva raised her glass. "To loyalty," she said, her voice syrupy, "and knowing where your roots are." I raised my glass halfway and kept my eyes on her, "and to pruning what poisons the soil." Her smile tightened. We went back to chewing. Then, midway through the main course, Geneva reached into a folder beside her chair. She pulled out photos, printed, glossy, large. She laid them on the table one by one, sliding them like playing cards. There was Elijah in a wheelchair, resting momentarily during the wedding. I remembered that moment. We'd danced for 2 songs and he needed a break. Nothing dramatic, but Geneva didn't care for truth. "Is this what you married into?" she said sweetly. "Pity over pride?" No one laughed, not even her usual lapdogs. I didn't touch the photos, but under the table my fingers curled tightly around my napkin. She wasn't done. She reached for another folder, thicker this time, and pulled out a document labeled Family Financial Amendment in bold type. She slid it toward me. "This," she said softly, "is to formalize what's already true. You've moved on. Elijah is your family now. This will remove your name from the family trust. No more confusion, no more awkward attachments." I didn't touch the paper. I leaned back, reading it from where I sat. "It's cleaner," she added, "and more dignified. For everyone." I picked it up then, read through. Most of it was familiar. Boilerplate trust language, lines I'd seen before, but one line caught my eye. The amendment referred to a decision made on a date before my wedding, which made the entire document void. In the eyes of the law, you can't backdate removal of a beneficiary without notice, and I had notice via cease and desist after the wedding. Geneva had moved too fast, too arrogantly. I smiled slightly. Then I folded the document neatly, placed it back in front of her, and looked her dead in the eyes. "You've already spent the money, haven't you?" A silence fell over the table like a dropped curtain. Her jaw twitched, just slightly. "You're scrambling," I said, still quiet. "That's why the fake amendments, the staged dinner, the insults dressed as concern. You're out of moves, Geneva." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "I'll give you one last gift," I said, standing. "Time. Use it wisely." Then I turned toward my father's photo, gave it a slight nod, and walked out. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still glistened. I didn't rush. I let the night wrap around me like armor. Back at the car, I sat for a moment before driving. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed, in, out, in, out. Geneva had tried to play her last card, and she'd lost. But that night, as I reached our front door, I realized someone had been inside. I eased the door open, expecting darkness and stillness, but the hallway light glowed. Something felt rearranged, like the air had been stirred by unwelcome hands. Elijah was upstairs showering, water drumming against tile. On the dining table sat a single cream envelope, centered with eerie precision. No stamp, no return address, only my first name in looping ink. We set the alarm every night. It hadn't chimed. I locked the door behind me, heart picking up speed, and slipped off my shoes to move quietly across the hardwood. The envelope was unsealed, as if whoever delivered it wanted to be sure I'd look inside. I slid out the contents and my stomach lurched. Printed screenshots, my counseling records from college, depression assessments, prescription histories, Therapy notes written in clinical shorthand that felt like strangers dissecting my soul. At the bottom, a single typed line asked, "Still think the past stays buried?" Fear flickered. Then fury gutted it. I heard Elijah kill the water upstairs. I called up, "We've got a situation." He came down in sweatpants, hair damp, and scanned the papers. His jaw tightened until the scar on his chin whitened. "These were locked behind university firewalls," he said. "Someone paid for a key." I turned one page over. In faint gray was a watermark, the stylized crest of Geneva's charitable foundation. Only top staff used that seal. "She bribed someone," Elijah muttered, "probably the record clerk." He met my gaze. "They don't just want money, Tracy. They want to paint you unfit, maybe unstable, so nothing you say holds weight. They want to take everything," I answered, folding the papers. "Even sanity." I didn't let the rage simmer. I used it. The next morning I drove to Geneva's downtown office. No appointment, no announcement. A board meeting hummed behind frosted glass. I pushed through. Chairs screeched as executives recognized me, the daughter their benefactor called a disgrace. Geneva sat at the head, pearl earrings screaming importance. She raised an eyebrow. "You came to cry?" "Chew." I set the envelope in the middle of the mahogany table, pressed record on my phone, and spoke evenly. "These are confidential medical files, obtained illegally. Dates, login times, and names of every employee who accessed them are on the metadata. I'm here to document Geneva Montgomery's next lie." She laughed, brittle. "You always dramatize." I began listing dates, patient privacy statutes, HIPAA sections. Voices shifted. A junior board member excused himself, eyes wide. Someone else muttered, "We had no idea." Geneva's lipstick smile faltered. That evening, Elijah and I sat across from a white-haired attorney recommended by his security contacts. She flipped through the files, whistling low. "This isn't just unethical," she said. "It's federal. Prison time is on the table for whoever facilitated access." She tapped a paragraph. "Your mother's foundation did. That's traceable." For the first time since this war began, I felt the balance tilt. My silence had never been weakness. It was a storm gathering data. We drove home under a sky heavy with thunder. I edited the boardroom audio into a short clip. Geneva, confident, sneering, captured saying, "Everyone has a price, even daughters." I posted it anonymously under the handle Spare Air. Within hours, Reddit threads exploded. By dawn, TikTok had memes of Geneva auctioning off family loyalty. Sponsors froze donations. A regional news station requested comment. Messages flooded my inbox, some supportive, some vicious. But the tide had turned. Geneva's groomed image cracked in prime time. I leaned back from the screen, exhausted but steadied by resolve. That's when my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost ignored it until I heard the voice on the other end whispering, "Tracy, it's Ellis. You have to get out. Now." Ellis's whisper still rang in my ear as Elijah and I sped through the night. Headlights carved quick tunnels in the mist while my brother's words looped, clearing the estate. Daddy's urn counted as clutter. I gripped the dash until my knuckles ached. Elijah didn't waste time with comfort. He understood that action, not reassurance, kept me steady. When we crested the hill, Geneva's mansion glowed like a ship preparing to sail. Rental trucks idled in the circular drive. Men in reflective vests ferried boxes out the front door. Ellis stood off to one side, arms folded, face tight with shame and urgency. I thanked him with a glance, then marched inside. The foyer smelled of fresh polish and final goodbyes. Tape guns snapped in distant rooms. I followed the sound of low jazz to Daddy's study. Geneva stood beside the mahogany desk, swirling red wine in a crystal glass. Movers edged around her, careful not to block her view. "You're late," she said, voice velvet over steel. "Everything sentimental is already on the truck." She tilted the glass. Ashes included. Pain pinched my chest, but anger burned hotter. My gaze swept the room, bookcases half-stripped, portrait hooks empty, until it landed on a cobalt vase half-hidden by drapery. Mama always said it clashed with the decor. Daddy loved it because Ellis made it in middle school art class. I walked to it, lifted the lid and saw a freezer bag tucked inside, marker labels smudged, "Property, Fred Montclair." My breath caught. They hadn't trashed him. They'd hidden him. I turned, cradling the makeshift urn. Why keep him if you hated him so much? My voice sounded distant. A tremor rippled through her satin blouse. Because even the worst daughters don't really let go, she said, words so low I almost missed them. I set the bag on the desk and placed the vase beside it. I didn't come to fight, Geneva. I came to close this. From my coat I took a sealed envelope and slid it across the wood. Inside is a pause on the lawsuit and the video, contingent on one thing. You sign. She eyed the envelope, suspicion warring with fatigue. Hands that never shook before trembled as she broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the pages, agreement to withdraw from the family trust, resign as foundation head, issue a public apology. The pen lay ready. Silence stretched. In the hallway, the mover's footsteps halted, news traveling faster than gossip. Geneva exhaled, shoulders sagging. She signed. One stroke, then another. Outside, men set boxes down carefully, almost reverently. Ellis stepped forward, shock widening his eyes. He wrapped me in an uncertain hug that grew sure when I didn't pull away. You didn't destroy her, he murmured. You made her face herself. I held Daddy's ashes close as Geneva walked past us toward the driveway. There was no dramatic exit, just a woman suddenly aware the crowd no longer followed when she turned. Weeks later, Elijah and I hosted a reception in a modest public garden. No string quartet, no monogrammed napkins. Just grilled chicken, mason jars of lemonade, and the rustle of early autumn leaves. Mrs. Coulter pressed my repaired veil into place, the tear now a silver lightning streak catching afternoon sun. A little girl in a polka dot dress tugged my sleeve. Why's your veil ripped? I crouched to her height. Because it's real, and so am I. She nodded like that made perfect sense, then skipped off to chase bubbles floating from a toy wand. Laughter followed her, threading through friends and strangers who had become family by choice. Elijah raised a toast with sweet tea. To truth that stands when storms end. Glasses clinked under the oaks. In that moment, I felt the ground steady beneath me. No longer soil Mama could scorch, but earth I had tended with patience and quiet power. Daddy's ashes rested in the cobalt vase on a picnic table, sun bouncing off blue glaze. I thought of Geneva somewhere beyond those trees, learning, for the first time, that control isn't the same as love, and losing one doesn't guarantee the other. Have you ever been underestimated by your own kin only to rise anyway, or found strength in the love others rejected? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one.